I took my injured coworker home. Then her mom asked if I was the man she kept talking about. The night Hannah Pierce fell off that ladder in aisle 12, I learned two things at the same time. 1. Adrenaline makes you strong enough to catch 130 pounds of falling coworker without thinking about your own back. 2. Some accidents don't just break an ankle. Some accidents break open a door you didn't know was closed. My name is Ryan Coleman. I'm 32, and I run the evening shift at Coleridge Building Supply, a lumber and hardware yard on the edge of town that smells like sawdust and diesel no matter what season it is. I'd worked there since I was 22, worked my way up from loading trucks to running the floor, and somewhere in those 10 years I'd gotten a reputation. Reliable. Steady. The guy you called when something needed fixing and you didn't want to hear excuses. Hannah started 6 months before that night. 28, quick with numbers, sharper with people than half the sales reps twice her age. She'd transferred in from the Ashford store after some mess with a manager nobody liked to talk about, and she kept to herself the first few weeks. Then she started laughing at my bad jokes in the break room, and after that we just sort of fell into an easy rhythm. Coffee before open. Small talk about weather and inventory. Nothing that meant anything. Or so I told myself. That Thursday, she was up on the rolling ladder in the plumbing aisle, reaching for a case of copper fittings some contractor needed before close. I heard the ladder shift before I saw it happen, that specific sound of wheels catching wrong on a warped floor tile, and then Hannah was in the air, arms out, case of fittings scattering across the concrete like dropped coins. I got to her before she hit. Not gracefully. I basically threw myself sideways and caught her weight against my chest, and we both went down hard, me first, her on top of me, the two of us skidding a few feet across the floor. For a second neither of us moved. "You okay?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I meant it to. She didn't answer right away. She rolled off me slow, careful, and when she tried to put weight on her right foot she made a sound that had nothing polite about it. "Ankle," she said through her teeth. "Ankle's not okay." I got her up, got her weight over my shoulder, and by the time Marcus came jogging over from the register, Marcus Dell, the other lead on evenings, a guy who'd been chasing Hannah with all the subtlety of a truck horn since her first week, the whole front of the store had gone quiet watching us. "I got her," I said, before Marcus could offer his version of helpful. He didn't like that. I saw it cross his face, quick and ugly, then gone. "I can drive her," he said. "I've got her," I said again, and something in my voice must have settled it, because he stepped back. I drove her to the urgent care myself, sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights for 2 hours while a doctor confirmed it wasn't broken, just a bad sprain, 3rd degree, non-weight-bearing for at least 10 days. They wrapped her ankle, gave her a boot and a set of crutches and a bottle of pills, and sent us back out into a parking lot gone dark and cold. "My car's still at the store," she said, staring at the boot on her foot like it belonged to somebody else. "I'll get it back to you tomorrow. Right now I'm taking you home." She looked at me sideways. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said. "Get in the truck, Hannah." She got in the truck. She gave me an address on Larkspur Street, a small neat house with a wraparound porch and a wind chime clinking softly in the dark. I helped her up the front steps, one arm under hers, crutches tucked under my other arm, moving slow so she wouldn't put weight on the bad foot by accident. Before I could even knock, the door opened. A woman stood there in a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair, maybe mid-50s, with the kind of face that looked like it had spent a lot of years being calm in emergencies. She took one look at the boot, then at me, then back at her daughter. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. A demand wrapped in a mother's voice. "I fell off a ladder, Mom." "I'm fine." Ryan caught me before I hit the ground. The woman's eyes came back to me and held there a beat too long. Something moved across her face, recognition maybe, or surprise, like she was checking a name against a memory. "Ryan," she repeated slowly. "Yes, ma'am." She kept looking at me like she was deciding something. Then, quiet enough that Hannah, fumbling with her crutches on the step below, didn't quite catch it, she said, "You're the one she's always talking about." I felt that sentence land somewhere in my chest before my brain even finished processing it. "Ma'am." But she'd already turned, already switched back into mother mode, hollering for Hannah to mind the loose board on the porch, telling me to bring her through to the den instead of the stairs. The moment passed so fast I almost convinced myself I'd misheard it. Almost. Her name was Carol. She had a way of moving through her own house like she owned every inch of it and none of the credit, fluffing pillows on the den couch, disappearing into the kitchen and coming back with ice packs and a glass of water and 2 pills lined up on a napkin like she'd done this exact routine 100 times before, for other injuries, other nights. I got Hannah settled on the couch, foot elevated on 2 pillows, and stood there in the doorway feeling like a man who didn't know if he was supposed to leave or stay. "You want coffee?" Carol asked me. "Or something stronger?" "It's been a night." "Coffee's fine," I said. "I've still got to drive home." She made a pot anyway, and I ended up sitting at her kitchen table while Hannah dozed off on painkillers in the next room, the television murmuring low. Carol set a mug in front of me, then sat down across the table with her own, studying me over the rim of it in a way that made me feel like I was being graded on something I hadn't studied for. "So," she said. "Ryan from the store." "That's me." "She talks about you," Carol said. "More than she thinks she does." I didn't know what to do with that, so I did what I always do with things I don't know what to do with. I looked down at my coffee. "We work together. She's good at her job." Carol made a small sound, not quite a laugh. "That's not what I meant, and I think you know that." I looked up. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something warm underneath the careful way she was watching me, like she was hoping I'd say the right thing and half expecting I wouldn't. "She comes home and tells me about her day," Carol said. "Ryan covered my shift so I could make the dentist appointment. Ryan noticed I was off today and brought me a sandwich without asking. Ryan yelled at that idiot Marcus for talking over me in the meeting." She shook her head slightly, fondness plain on her face. "It's been going on for months. I feel like I know you already, and you've been in my house for 20 minutes. Heat crawled up the back of my neck. I didn't know she noticed all that." "She notices everything about you," Carol said. "She's just too proud to say it out loud to you directly. So she says it to me instead, over dinner, like I'm not going to put it together." I didn't have an answer for that. I finished my coffee slower than I needed to, mostly because I wasn't ready to leave yet, and when I finally did stand up to go, Carol walked me to the door. "Thank you for catching her," she said, quiet now, no teasing left in it. "I mean that. Not just tonight. All of it." "She'd do the same for me," I said. Carol looked at me for a long second. "I believe that," she said. "That's rarer than you'd think." I drove home that night with the radio off, the whole cab of the truck too quiet, replaying that sentence over and over. "You're the one she's always talking about." I told myself it didn't mean anything beyond a coworker being decent to a coworker. I told myself that the whole way home, and I still didn't believe it by the time I got there. The next morning I drove Hannah's car back to Larkspur Street before my shift, key already cut and tested, tank filled because it had been sitting low. Carol answered the door in an apron dusted with flour, and the whole kitchen behind her smelled like cinnamon. "You didn't have to do the gas," she said, taking the keys from me. "I know. You say that a lot." "It's usually true," I said, and she laughed for real that time, a short surprised sound like I'd earned it. Hannah was propped up at the kitchen table, foot in the boot resting on a chair, hair pulled back messy, a textbook-looking binder open in front of her that I recognized as the store's inventory reconciliation packet. "You're supposed to be resting," I said. "I'm supposed to be bored out of my mind," she corrected, not looking up. "This is better than daytime television. Corporate's not expecting that till next Friday." "I know. I like being ahead." She finally looked up at me, and something about the morning light through the kitchen window made her look softer than she did on the sales floor, less armored. "Thank you," she said. "For last night. All of it. You don't have to thank me for catching you. That's not a favor, that's just physics and bad timing." That got a real laugh out of her, small and surprised, the kind I realized I'd been chasing without admitting it to myself. Carol, at the stove behind us, didn't turn around, but I caught her smiling into the pan of eggs like she'd overheard something she'd been waiting to hear. I told myself I'd stop by once, make sure she got home okay, and that would be that. Instead I found myself back on Larkspur Street 2 days later with a bag of groceries Hannah hadn't asked me to bring, because I remembered her mentioning her mom's knees weren't good for long grocery runs and the fridge had looked thin. Carol met me at the door before I even knocked, like she'd been watching for my truck. "You didn't have to," she said, taking the bags. "You keep saying that like it's going to work eventually." "Old habit." "I'll stop saying it if you stop doing it." "Not likely," I said, and she smiled at me like I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. Over the next 2 weeks, that became the shape of things. I'd stop by after close, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with takeout, sometimes with nothing but an hour to spare. I fixed the loose board on the porch step because it bothered me every time I walked over it. I mowed the lawn one Saturday without being asked, and Carol brought me lemonade halfway through and stood there watching with her arms crossed and a look on her face I couldn't quite name. "You know," she said, "most men who court a woman skip the part where they win over her mother first." I nearly dropped the lemonade. We're not. Ryan." She said my name like a period at the end of a sentence. "I raised that girl alone for 11 years after her father passed. I know what it looks like when somebody's falling for her. I saw it happen with 2 men before you, and neither of them looked anything like this." I didn't have a good answer, so I drank the lemonade and let the silence sit there instead, which Carol seemed to find funnier than any answer I could have given her. Inside, Hannah was healing slow but steady, the boot coming off after 2 weeks in favor of an ankle brace, crutches traded for a cane she complained about constantly. She was stubborn about it in a way that made me like her more, not less, refusing help until she genuinely couldn't manage, then accepting it with a huff like it personally offended her. "You don't have to keep coming by," she told me one evening, sitting on the porch steps with her brace propped on the railing, watching the sun go down orange over the neighbor's fence. "I know you've got your own place. Your own life." "I like coming by," I said. "Why?" It wasn't really a question. It came out flat, almost defensive, like she was bracing for a joke or an excuse. "Because your mom makes good coffee," I said, and Hannah rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd strain something. "And because I like seeing you not covered in warehouse dust for once. And because I like you, Hannah. I've liked you for a while. I just didn't figure it was my place to say so while you were on painkillers and couldn't run away." She went quiet. The wind chime on the porch clinked softly. Somewhere down the block a dog barked twice and stopped. "I've liked you since my second week at that store," she finally said. "You brought me a coffee without asking how I took it, and you got it exactly right, and I went home and told my mother about it like it was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me." "Black, 1 sugar," I said. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me. I just don't usually say so." She laughed, a little wet around the edges, and looked away toward the fence and the fading light. "This is a mess," she said. "You're my coworker. My mother already adores you. If this doesn't work, I lose my job's easiest friendship and my mother's favorite topic of conversation in one shot." "It'll work," I said. "You don't know that." "No," I admitted. "But I know I'm not going anywhere, and I know you're not either, and that's usually enough to build on." She didn't say anything else that night, but when I left, she caught my hand on the porch steps, just for a second, just long enough to mean something, and let go before either of us had to name it out loud. There was a night in there somewhere, about 10 days into her recovery, that I still think about more than I probably should. I'd stopped by after close with dinner from the diner on 5th, the kind of place that still wrote orders on paper tickets and called everybody hon regardless of age. Carol had a book club that night, one of those wine and gossip arrangements she pretended was purely literary, so it was just me and Hannah at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock over the stove. "You know what's strange," she said, picking at her fries. "I've spent 3 weeks stuck in this house, and it's been the best 3 weeks I've had in about 2 years. That's a low bar for a sprained ankle. I'm serious." She set her fork down. "I used to think being busy was the same as being happy. Work, gym, errands, more work. I filled every hour so I wouldn't have to notice I was filling it with nothing. And then I couldn't do any of it, and instead of falling apart, I just sat still. And it turned out sitting still wasn't so bad, as long as you were sitting still with the right person." I didn't say anything right away, because I didn't trust myself to say it without giving away more than I meant to that early. "You've had a lot of time to think," I finally said. "I have." "Want to know what I thought about most?" "Tell me." "How you never once made me feel like a burden," she said. Not once. Not when I needed help getting to the bathroom that first week, not when I snapped at you because the pain meds made me irritable, not when I asked you to run to 3 different pharmacies because the first 2 didn't have my prescription. You just did it. Like it wasn't a question. It wasn't, I said. That's the part you're not getting. It was never a question for me. She looked at me across the table for a long moment, something warm and a little scared moving behind her eyes, like she wanted to say more but wasn't ready yet. I didn't push. I'd learned by then that Hannah gave things up in her own time, on her own terms, and rushing her only made her retreat further behind that careful, competent wall she kept up at work. So I let the silence sit there instead, comfortable, unhurried, and eventually she reached over and stole a fry off my plate instead of finishing the sentence, and I let her have that too. It was around that same week that Carol started including me in things without asking, the way you fold a new ingredient into a recipe you've made 100 times before. She'd set 3 places at the table instead of 2 before I'd even said I was staying. She'd mention errands out loud, half to herself, half to me, in a way that made it clear she expected I'd offer to run them, and I always did. One Sunday she handed me a church bulletin with a potluck circled on it and said, without looking up from her crossword, "Bring something with meat in it." The vegetarians always bring enough casseroles to sink a boat. I'm not sure I'm invited to your church potluck, Carol. You've been invited since the 2nd week, she said. You just hadn't noticed yet. That seems to be a pattern with you. I brought a tray of barbecue that Sunday, and half the congregation asked Hannah, in that not-so-subtle small-town way, who the tall fellow with the good ribs was. She just smiled and said, "That's Ryan," like the name explained everything that needed explaining, and for the first time I understood that whatever this was between us had stopped being a secret weeks before either of us admitted it out loud. There was a harder night too, one I don't think about as fondly. About 2.5 weeks in, Hannah got a call from her old store in Ashford, some former co-worker fishing for gossip about the manager mess she'd transferred away from, and it knocked her sideways in a way I hadn't seen before. I found her on the back porch afterward, arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at nothing. "You don't have to talk about it," I said, sitting down beside her, not too close. "It's stupid," she said. It was over a year ago. I shouldn't still feel like this. Feeling like something doesn't come with an expiration date just because it's inconvenient. She looked over at me, surprised, like she hadn't expected that answer from a man who fixed ladders and hauled lumber for a living. "My old manager," she said slowly, "made my life difficult for about 8 months. Nothing anybody could really prove. Just small things. Taking credit for my ideas in meetings. Scheduling me for the worst shifts and calling it random. Telling corporate I wasn't a team player when I pushed back on any of it. I transferred here because I didn't think anyone would believe me if I tried to fight it, and I was tired of trying." "I believe you," I said. "For what it's worth." "It's worth a lot, actually." She wiped at her eyes quick, like she was embarrassed to be caught doing it. "I think that's part of why I noticed you so fast at Coleridge. You never once made me feel like I had to earn basic respect. You just gave it. Like it was the default setting instead of something I had to prove I deserved. That's how it should work for everybody," I said. "I'm sorry it didn't, for you, for so long." She leaned her head against my shoulder then, first time she'd done that, light and careful like she was testing whether I'd flinch away. I didn't. We sat there a long while, the porch light buzzing faintly overhead, moths circling it in slow lazy loops, and neither of us said anything else that night that needed saying. Some conversations end better in silence than in words, and that one did. Word got around the store the way word always does in a place where 40 people work 3 shifts and gossip travels faster than inventory trucks. By the time Hannah came back to work, 3.5 weeks after the fall, Kane retired, brace hidden under her jeans, half the floor already had opinions about the 2 of us. Marcus had the loudest ones. I caught him in the break room on her first day back, leaning against the vending machine with 2 of the younger stockers, talking just loud enough to be sure I'd hear it when I walked in. "Real convenient," he was saying. "Girl breaks her ankle, and suddenly Coleman's over at her house every night playing hero. Bet he's already got his eye on that shift supervisor spot opening up in Ashford. Nothing like a little charity work to pad the resume." The 2 stalkers laughed, uneasy, the kind of laugh people give when they don't actually think something's funny but don't want to be the one who doesn't laugh. I set my thermos down on the counter, slow and deliberate. You want to say that again with me standing here, I said, or was it only funny from across the room? Marcus straightened up, that easy grin sliding into something more careful. Just talking, man. Talk about something else. He held my eyes for a second, decided against whatever he was about to say, and pushed off the vending machine, heading back out to the floor. The two stalkers scattered after him like they hadn't been part of it at all. I didn't tell Hannah about it. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't think it was worth the ammunition it would hand Marcus if she came in swinging on my behalf and gave him something new to talk about. That turned out to be a mistake, because Marcus wasn't finished, and he wasn't the kind of man who let a warning slow him down for long. It came to a head on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Hannah's return, during the monthly all-staff meeting in the break room where the district manager, a tired-looking woman named Patricia, ran through quarterly numbers nobody really listened to. Hannah was presenting the inventory reconciliation report she'd built during her recovery, standing at the front of the room with a stack of printouts, more confident than I'd seen her since the fall. Marcus raised his hand halfway through her presentation. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But shouldn't we maybe get a second opinion on these numbers? No offense to Hannah, but she built this whole report on painkillers from her couch. Might want somebody who was actually on the floor to double-check it." The room went quiet in that specific ugly way rooms go quiet when everyone's waiting to see who flinches first. Hannah's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "The numbers are accurate," she said. "I cross-referenced them against 3 weeks of register logs and the supplier invoices. You're welcome to check my math, Marcus, but I promise you it holds." "I'm just saying," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, playing to the room now, "it's a little suspicious that Coleman here," he tipped his head at me, "has been so hands-on with Hannah's recovery. Makes a guy wonder if this whole report got a little help from somebody with a personal stake in making her look good." I felt heat crawl up my neck, fast and hot, but before I could open my mouth, Hannah beat me to it. "Ryan didn't touch this report," she said, voice level, cutting clean through the room. "I built it myself, on my own laptop, at my own kitchen table, because I didn't want to come back to this job looking like I'd lost a step. If you've got a problem with my numbers, Marcus, bring me the specific line item you're worried about, and I'll walk you through it. If you've just got a problem with me, say that instead, and stop hiding it behind spreadsheets." Marcus's grin faltered. Patricia, at the head of the table, cleared her throat and glanced between them like she was trying to decide whether this was worth wading into. "Marcus," Patricia said finally, "do you have a specific concern with the data, or was that commentary?" He didn't have an answer ready. "Just thoroughness," he muttered. "That's all." "Then let Hannah finish," Patricia said, and the meeting moved on, but the air in the room stayed tight the rest of the hour. Afterward, in the parking lot, Hannah caught up to me before I got to my truck, arms crossed against the evening chill. "You knew he'd try something like that," she said. "That's why you didn't help with the report even when I asked you to look it over. I figured he'd find a way to make it about us instead of the numbers if I put my hands anywhere near it," I said. "Didn't think he'd do it in front of Patricia, though. That was bold, even for him." "I can fight my own battles, you know," she said, but there wasn't much heat in it. "I know. I watched you do it about 30 minutes ago. Did a better job than I would have, honestly." I was 2 seconds from saying something I'd have regretted. That got a small smile out of her, tired but real. "You wanted to?" "I wanted to very badly." "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't my fight to win for you," I said. "It was yours to win for yourself. I just wanted to be standing close enough to catch you if it went sideways. Same as the latter." She looked at me for a long moment, something soft moving behind her eyes. "You're going to make this very hard for me to stay mad at the world," she said. "That's the plan." Marcus didn't let it go, though. 2 days later, I found out why the ladder had shifted the way it had that first night. One of the younger stalkers, a kid named Tyler who'd clearly been carrying the secret longer than he wanted to, cornered me in the loading dock, looking like he hadn't slept right in weeks. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not tell Marcus I told you." "Go on." "That floor tile in plumbing, the one that made her ladder shift. Marcus knew it was warped. Maintenance flagged it 2 days before Hannah fell. He was supposed to put up a caution sign and didn't. I heard him tell another guy he forgot, but he didn't forget. He just didn't care enough to fix it because it wasn't his aisle. I stood there in the loading dock with that information sitting heavy in my chest, ugly and cold. It wasn't attempted anything, not deliberate, not some plotted harm. Just carelessness from a man who'd rather flirt and posture than do the parts of the job that mattered. But it had put Hannah on a cane for 3 weeks, and it had almost put her on the ground a lot harder than she landed. I didn't go looking for a fight. I went looking for Patricia instead, told her what Tyler told me, let her pull the maintenance logs herself and confirm the flag date against the caution sign paperwork Marcus never filed. I didn't need to raise my voice or throw a single punch. The paperwork did that for me. Marcus got a written warning and a mandatory safety retraining, and something in the way he carried himself around the store shifted after that, smaller, quieter, less inclined to run his mouth in break rooms. He didn't apologize to Hannah directly. Some men never do. But he stopped talking about us, and that was close enough to peace as I figured we'd get. Tyler caught up with me a week later out by the loading dock, looking like he still expected to get chewed out for saying anything in the first place. "Marcus, find out it was me who told you?" he asked. "Didn't come from me," I said. "And it's not going to." He nodded, relieved, and shifted his weight like there was something else on his mind. "For what it's worth," he said, "everybody on the floor already knew Marcus cut corners. Nobody wanted to be the one who said it, because he's been here longer, and nobody wanted the target on their back. You put a target on your back anyway." "Yeah, well." He shrugged, looking younger than his 20 years right then. "Hannah's always been decent to me. Covered my shift twice when my kid was sick, never made a big deal out of it. Figured I owed her the truth at least once." I clapped him on the shoulder and told him if he ever needed anything, my door was open, and I meant it. Some debts you pay forward instead of back, and Tyler had just taught himself that lesson a lot earlier than most people manage to. It's the kind of thing you notice in a workplace if you pay attention long enough, the quiet decency moving underneath all the noise, usually from the people nobody thinks to thank. Hannah found out the real reason for the fall a few days later, when Patricia mentioned it in passing during a safety briefing, careful not to name names but not exactly subtle about it either. Hannah came and found me on the loading dock after, quiet in a way I hadn't seen from her before. "It wasn't an accident," she said. "Not really. He just didn't care enough to put up a sign." "I know," I said. "You knew before I did. Tyler told me a few days back. I didn't want to hand you one more thing to be angry about right when you'd finally stopped being angry about the last thing." She looked at me for a long moment, and I braced for her to be upset that I'd sat on it, but instead something in her face softened instead, like she was recalculating something about me all over again. "You keep doing that," she said. "Carrying things quietly so I don't have to carry them at all." "Habit," I said. "It's not just a habit. It's who you are." She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the small scar above her eyebrow from some childhood mishap she'd told me about weeks earlier, close enough that the loading dock and the whole store around us seemed to fall away into background noise. "My mother was right about you, you know. From the very first night." "About what?" "That I'd been talking about you for months before you ever noticed." "I noticed," I said. "I just didn't let myself believe it meant what I hoped it meant. And now? Now I'm done not believing it." I kissed her right there on the loading dock, forklifts idling somewhere behind us, the smell of cut lumber thick in the evening air, and she kissed me back like she'd been waiting exactly as long as I had, which, as it turned out, she had. We told Carol together 2 nights later, sitting at her kitchen table over the same coffee that had started this whole thing. She didn't act surprised. She just smiled the smile of a woman who'd known the ending of the story since chapter 1, and poured us all a second round like it was a celebration she'd been planning for weeks. "I already knew," she said, when Hannah tried to explain. "I've known since the night he carried you up my porch steps and looked at me like he was scared he'd done something wrong just by being decent to my daughter." "Was I that obvious?" I asked. "Ryan," Carol said, patting my hand like I was a slow but well-meaning student, "you brought groceries to a house you had no reason to keep visiting for 2 weeks straight. You weren't subtle. You were just patient. There's a difference, and I happen to think it's the better quality of the two." In the months after that, things settled into something steadier than I think either of us expected so fast. I still worked evenings at Coleridge. Hannah eased back into full duty on the floor, Brace gone by midsummer, Kane long retired to a closet Carol swore she'd donate and never actually did. We didn't make some big announcement to the rest of the store. We didn't have to. People figured it out the way people in a small town always figure things out, watching who parked next to whom in the lot, who brought whose coffee order without being asked, who lingered a beat too long saying goodbye at the end of a shift. Patricia pulled me aside once, a few months in, not unkindly. "Just so we're clear," she said, "I don't have a policy against coworkers dating. I do have a policy against favoritism. You understand the difference?" "I do," I said. "Ask anybody on the floor if Hannah's gotten a single easy assignment out of me. They'll laugh at you." She did ask around, because that's the kind of manager Patricia was, thorough to a fault, and whatever she heard back seemed to satisfy her, because she never brought it up again except once, at the following year's holiday party, when she raised a plastic cup of eggnog in our direction and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, to Coleman and Pierce, the only couple in this building who argue about spreadsheet formatting as foreplay. Hannah turned the color of a stop sign. I laughed until my ribs hurt. Carol, for her part, never let either of us forget how early she'd called it. She brought it up at nearly every family dinner for the better part of a year, usually right as somebody took a bite of food so they couldn't argue back with their mouth full. "I knew the second he carried you up those porch steps," she'd say. I told my sister that same night. I said, "That girl finally found the one who isn't going to waste her time." Hannah would roll her eyes every single time, but she never once told her mother to stop telling the story, and I noticed that, the way you notice the things people don't say as much as the things they do. There was one more difficult stretch before the good part of the story really settled in, a stretch I don't like dwelling on but that feels dishonest to leave out. About 8 months after the fall, Hannah went up for a regional supervisor opening at the Ashford store, the same location she'd transferred out of, the same location with a fresh management team that had nothing to do with the old manager who'd made her life difficult. She was terrified to even apply, worried the old reputation would follow her even though the people responsible for it were long gone. I told her the only way to know for sure was to try, and if it went badly, I'd still be standing on the loading dock waiting for her either way. She got the job. First round of interviews, no contest, on the strength of the very same reconciliation report Marcus had once tried to pick apart in a break room meeting. When she called to tell me, her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and I had to pull my truck over on the shoulder of Route 9 because I couldn't see straight enough to keep driving through the sudden sting in my own eyes. "You did that," I told her. "Every bit of that was you. You believed it before I did," she said. "That counts for something too." We got married a year and a half later, in Carol's backyard, under the same wind chime that had been clinking softly the night I first carried Hannah up those porch steps. Marcus wasn't invited, though he did eventually transfer to the Ashford store, chasing that supervisor position he'd once accused me of angling for. I heard he's doing fine there. I try to mean that when I say it. Carol walked Hannah down the makeshift aisle between 2 rows of folding chairs, because there was no father left to do it, and when she handed her daughter's hand to mine, she leaned in and whispered something only I could hear. "Take care of the girl I've been bragging about for 2 years," she said. "And keep bringing the groceries. Old habits, remember." I promised her I would, and I have. These days, Hannah runs the Ashford store herself, a promotion she earned with numbers nobody could argue with, ironically the very same store Marcus transferred to, though from what I hear they've settled into a professional truce neither of them talks about much. I still run evenings at Coleridge, still keep an eye on the plumbing aisle floor tiles every single shift, a habit I doubt I'll ever break. Carol still makes the best coffee on Larkspur Street, and every Sunday, without fail, we're at her table for dinner, 3 chairs pulled close instead of 2, a family built out of a bad fall, a good catch, and a mother who knew the ending before either of us had the courage to write it. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly aren't the ones we're falling for. Sometimes it's the person watching from the kitchen doorway, pouring the coffee, who notices it first. Have you ever had someone else's parent see something in you before you saw it in yourself? And would you have caught the hint that fast, or would it have taken you as long as it took me? Tell me in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.